As we gazed, a mass of clouds hanging over what appeared to be the center of the range broke and revealed two majestic peaks, Mount McKinley and Mount Foraker, glistening in the slanting rays of the afternoon sun. Far above the crest line, they towered, enormous mountains, even at a distance of 120 miles. 4 years before, while making an exploration down the Tanana with canoes, I had seen the same peaks at about the same distance, but from the opposite direction. These were the happiest days of summer, cheered by the thought that every day's march was bringing us visibly nearer to our goal. We lent ourselves readily to the influence of the clear and invigorating air, and the inspiration of that majestic peak ever looming before us, the highest mountain of North America, which we were the first to explore.
These were the words of Dr. Alfred Brooks as his party made its way towards Mount McKinley in 1902. His expedition to explore the north face of the Alaska Range and the base of Mount McKinley was part of a system of exploratory surveys across Alaska undertaken by the U.S. Geological Survey shortly after the turn of the century. In his diary of his expedition, Dr. Brooks wrote of the many wonders that has today made Denali National Park and Preserve one of the most spectacular parks in America.
Among the foothills, averaging a height of 3,000 or 4,000 feet, dwelt large numbers of mountain sheep. In the course of one morning's ramblings, I counted more than 100 of the mountain dwellers. Not only was game plentiful, but so little did it know of man that it regarded us rather with curiosity than mistrust. During our journey across the Piedmont Plateau for days and weeks together, we were hardly out of sight of caribou. They had a curious way of approaching, either individually or in bands, to within 50 yards of the moving pack train by a series of large circles. Sometimes a lone buck would encircle our camp for hours at a time, 1 minute standing erect gazing at us with rapt attention, another flying across the smooth sod at breakneck pace, only to approach again from a different direction.
Dr. Brooks' 1902 expedition to the base of McKinley was the first extensive exploration by white men of the land around the Great Mountain. But the wildlife Brooks so avidly described was soon to attract other explorers and naturalists. One of these, Charles Sheldon, arrived in the area in 1906 to study Dall sheep. Struck by the variety and number of animals in the area, he soon became the first person to examine not only the white sheep, but also the grizzly bears, moose, caribou, and many of the smaller animals and birds in the vicinity of the mountain. By the time he left Alaska in 1908, Sheldon was convinced that the land around Mount McKinley was a national treasure, and he had conceived a vision of a national park in the heart of the territory. He wrote,
"When Denali National Park shall be made easy of access with accommodations and facilities for travel, including a comfortable lodge at the foot of the moraine of Peters Glacier, as it surely will be, it is not difficult to anticipate the enjoyment and inspiration visitors will receive."
Today, Sheldon's prediction has largely come true. Nearly 250,000 visitors come to the park each year to find the enjoyment and inspiration Sheldon wrote about, and Sheldon himself can claim much of the credit. Upon his return to the East Coast in 1908, Sheldon enlisted the support of the Boone and Crockett Club for the idea of a national park and preserve around Mount McKinley. And in 1917, Congress made that vision a reality.
The park is, as you know, was originally 1.9 million acres as the former Mount McKinley National Park, established in 1917. It's one of the oldest parks in the nation, not the oldest. Yellowstone holds that honor, established in 1872. The park was established principally and in the beginning and even further recognized in 1980 for its wildlife. It is perhaps the only place in Alaska that visitors can enter the park and see the 4 major large mammal species in Alaska, which customarily happens. The park was expanded from the original 1.9 million acres to approximately 6 million acres in December of 1980. With the same type of purpose, Congress intended to expand that ecosystem to provide more land area for the major wildlife species found within this area.
Today, despite the large numbers of people who visit the park each year, it is still possible to enjoy the unspoiled wilderness that so enthralled Brooks and Sheldon 80 years ago.
From our own surveys and those that have returned from the various bus trips and from those that have experienced the backcountry, for many of the visitors, it's the first time they've come in contact with the real tundra of the north or the taiga vegetation that one expects to find here. To those that come up from the lower 48, to them it's an experience to see wildlife truly in a wild state and in a wilderness condition. And what they generally find, and almost to the person on these trips to Wonder Lake and back, is that they will see a number of grizzly bears. They will pass through the moose habitat, usually here in the first 15 to 20 miles, and probably see some moose. Not unusual for them to see 20 to 30 Dall sheep, and usually they will see some caribou. And those 4 major species are just, you're nearly not able to view those almost anywhere else in Alaska without an extensive trip across country and a very expensive one. And then you'd be lucky to see them all at once. But most of the visitors, and that's, we're talking about some 100,000+ that make the trip on the bus, most of those will see that, as well as some lesser species. If they're really lucky, they'll get to see a wolf, and we've had some visitors here just a week ago that got to see a white wolf, which was a rare sighting for, I'm sure, them as it would be for us. We knew about the white wolf, and we've seen it every once in a while, but we're here all the time. Some visitors recently got to see a wolf making a kill on a caribou, and the whole bus was able to witness this. These kinds of things are just unusual for people to see anywhere, even if you set them up to film them. And this is all happening very naturally. So it's no question that it's a great benefit not only to the National Park Service, but to all the people that visit it, and especially to the state of Alaska.
If Denali National Park and Preserve is one of the largest and wildest national parks in the United States, it's probably not surprising that it's also one of the most difficult parks to travel in. A single, narrow, washboard dirt road winds 80 miles into the park, rattling your teeth every inch of the way. And even that road is off limits to private vehicles during the peak season, unless visitors are camping in the park or have a special travel permit. As a result, most of the 250,000 visitors who come here each year see the park from a bus. There are 2 bus systems in the park. The shuttle buses start from the Riley Creek campground at the edge of the highway and run every few minutes. Supplied as a service of the National Park Service, the shuttle buses are free and run all the way to Wonder Lake at the end of the park road, a 12-hour round trip. The shuttles stop obligingly at any sign of wildlife for the enjoyment of riders, and will also stop to drop riders off or pick them up anywhere in the park. The other bus service in the park is a privately run wildlife tour. The wildlife bus drivers spend the 8-hour trip to Stony Hill and back telling their passengers about the lives and environments of the many species of animals and birds spotted along the way. But regardless of how they choose to travel into the park, visitors are rarely disappointed in their search for the animals that have made Denali National Park and Preserve famous.
They have really two missions. One is conservation and visitor use. It seems almost paradoxical, but that's been their mission throughout the United States, to have both a preservation force, but at the same time visitor use. And what we try to do is balance that off so that the use does not impact the land to the point where you lose the purpose for which you've established the park. Probably the most important thing we're doing, however, which we firmly believe is the principal reason that the visitor can see the wildlife that they do see in this park, is the establishment of the shuttle bus system, which was established in 1972. And by that I mean our studies previously and one that we have ongoing at present shows that the visitor can get on a shuttle bus and exit at any point that they like. However, the drivers do not permit anyone to leave the bus when wildlife is present. They will stop and allow people to view the wildlife from within the bus, but they're not able to get out until they've either passed the wildlife or somehow it's out of sight. We've discovered that there are 2 times during the year when we leave the park open to automobile traffic. In the early opening in the spring, and then later on in the fall after Labor Day. And almost in every case, the first car, the people get out, see the wildlife, and they're thrilled by it, and they approach it for photographs, and that drives the wildlife back a little bit. The second car has the same impact, and then the third car doesn't see the wildlife because now it's out of sight. So we firmly believe in that shuttle bus system as the key to allowing the visitors to see the major wildlife species that are here. And it has worked very, very well.
For those visitors who have time to get off the bus, the park holds other wonders. Behind park headquarters, there are frequent dog sled demonstrations. Dog sleds still being a mode of travel used frequently in the park during the winter. There are also guided hikes of various lengths throughout the park each day. And for visitors lucky enough to be camping at one of the established campgrounds, there are evening programs led by summer rangers.
So tonight, I want to separate fact from fiction out there, okay? I know you hear all these gory horror tales about the night of the grizzly and disrupted a camp, but I want to explain some of those things to you tonight. I want you to develop a little bit of understanding about why I am the way I am. So I thought the ranger...
And for those who choose to hike in the untouched portions of Denali, there is 6 million acres of wilderness to explore.
In the backcountry, we have approximately 30 to 50,000. That number is not going to grow too much because the backcountry is delineated out into carrying capacities for each numbers of sites, so there's only so many people can be in a certain place during one night. So that number will not grow a great deal, at least for the former Mount McKinley National Park. Now, we have not done that with the lands that have been added so far, and the use there is strictly by permit and fairly open. We're not controlling that use at this point.
Besides the visitors, the wildlife, the activities, The backcountry, there is one other central element to Denali National Park, one that towers above all the rest, the mountain itself. Denali, the Great One, the tallest mountain in North America. Each year, visitors pause at the Eielson Visitor Center in the heart of the park to strain for a glimpse of the famous peak, which spends most of the time hidden among the clouds. And each year, hundreds of climbers come from all over the world to challenge its icy slopes in a bid for the top.
Phil Urschler, our guide from Rainier Mountaineering Institute, he let out a cheer, like a scream, when we hit the very top of the peak. Then the rest of us just sort of hugged and kissed each other. We'd been running and jogging and swimming and lifting weights for the last 6 months, none of which is fun. And so finally the ultimate fun was here, being on top. It's very exhilarating, almost the type of thing where you cheer and cry all at the same time.
But it is not to the park that the climbers come to begin their expeditions. It is to here, to the town of Talkeetna, south of the park, close to the highway. A quiet town, Talkeetna is home to a few hundred people who seek the peace of the outdoors, an independent lifestyle, and each other's company. During most of the year, Talkeetna is largely unmolested by outsiders, except for the few who stop for gas or lunch as they drive the highway. But during the summer, Talkeetna becomes a town of another sort, a recreational center, host to the many people who come to climb the mountain. It is here, in this quiet, scenic place, that climbers buy their last supplies, charter the planes that will fly them to their base camps, and wait impatiently for the weather on the mountain to clear so they can start their long hike to the top.
I don't think anybody complains about the climbers. The climbers really don't spend a lot of money except on their flying and climbing preparations. Occasionally they'll get rained out and stay in a motel, but a lot of times they'll camp in tents. But nobody minds the climbers. The climbers are good people, and they just, come through each year, and they're interesting people from all over the world. We find them interesting, and they find us interesting. So.
And come they do, from all over, and with all skill levels. Although renowned for its difficulty, McKinley is not only a major mountain for expert climbers, it is also a favorite training ground for novices trying to sharpen their skills around its base against the day that they'll be prepared to tackle the summit.
Well, the Kahitla Glacier, as I said, is at about 10,000 feet. The weather, when it's not raining or blowing or snowing, is warm. It's a place where people can sit around in perhaps a sweater, talk about some basic techniques, go up and try some skills out, and make a base camp, come back and be comfortable and learn in a situation where there's very low risk. Yeah.
And for expert climbers, there is the summit of McKinley itself, a challenge so difficult that of the hundreds of climbers who attempt the mountain each year, only slightly more than half make it.
Most people climb Mount McKinley by the West Buttress route, which technically is not difficult. It's walking primarily most of the way, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. It's very difficult and dangerous. You start with glacier travel on the lower elevations where you have to be roped up together so that if one person falls into a crevasse, the others can stop this person and help him out. Then you would find any range of weather. In the summertime, it can be quite hot on the lower glaciers where the sun shines down into the glaciers. Then further up, you may expect temperatures anywhere down to 40 below zero with high winds, heavy snow, whiteout conditions. So on a 3-week climb, you may run into a whole range of weather extremes. Mount McKinley is further north than most high mountains, and therefore the altitude combined with the severe cold make it more difficult than other peaks of comparable height in other parts of the world.
Despite the technical ease of the West Buttress route, most parties take 2.5 or 3 weeks to make the climb, and many, despite their best efforts, never make it to the top at all. Darrell Bornhop, Chuck Graves, and Tom Evans came from Columbia, Missouri to challenge the mountain. They spent 21 days on its slopes, all but 4 of those days in the grip of the ferocious storms so common on the peak. Temperatures dropped to 40 below, and winds gusted up to 80 miles an hour. Finally, at 17,000 feet, weather, altitude sickness, and a close brush with disaster forced them to turn back.
I've done a lot of soloing in mountains before, climbing by myself, and they left me alone at 14 because I wasn't feeling well, and the next day I felt a lot stronger, so I thought I'd just mosey up to 17 by myself and meet them. And along the way, within a half hour, 20 minutes, after being at about 16.5, very, very strong winds and whiteout conditions quickly developed. And for the next hour or so on the ridge, it was a harrowing experience. Twice the winds were eddying around underneath some rocks, and they lifted me up off the ridge and threw me 25 feet down the cliff. And it was only, luckily it was only my arm would catch a rock or something on the way down that stopped me from going down all the way. And I pulled in pretty tired that night.
He was pretty bad off, yeah.
Scared shitless. But, I did not have much of a choice. I had to keep going, I couldn't go back down, and I had to keep going to meet up to them at 17. It's just the quickness and the ferocity of the conditions that developed was pretty amazing. It was pretty astounding.
Graves was fortunate. During the average climbing season, about 5 out of every 100 climbers who attempt the summit are seriously injured, and 1 out of every 100 is killed.
We'll all be back. It's a beautiful mountain. Good climbing.
In terms of establishing the park, though, the mountain was not really the most important factor. The most important factor, and the factor in the basic legislation, really deals with the wildlife, not with the mountain itself. So the mountain was certainly recognized in 1917, just as it is today, but it's the wildlife that's the key feature of this park.
Times are changing at Denali Park, with a 13% increase in the number of visitors to the park in the last year or so. Cunningham says Park Service Management is exploring new ways to accommodate the public without damaging the park.
And at present, we have a general management plan team that's devoting most of their efforts to studies on the south end of the park. We recognize that Anchorage growing at the pace that it is, that there is probably a large need for visitor use of this area. And so we're devoting a principal and key point of our studies on the south end to accommodate that use. All of the things that we might develop, however, would try to be done in such a manner as to minimize the impact on the land and still allow the visitors the opportunities for the outdoor recreation that's present. And with good planning, we hope that that's achieved.
New development at the south end of the park is at best, however, several years away.
Well, we have a rather complex process to go through in the general management plan process. There will be a team of experts representing all of the professional categories that will inventory the land, so to speak, and in coordination with other federal and state agencies, will eventually arrive at public meetings to present this plan and get the public's input. And taking all of that together, then they would come up with a conceptual plan, a plan that would bring forth the concepts of what it is we would propose and intend to do. At that point, that gives us a document to go forward to Congress to seek funding to accomplish those ends. Now, this process will take, in the planning process, probably another year and a half, and the public meetings 6 months, at which time we would then hope to have a document to go to Congress, which runs a 3-year funding cycle. Once we present these opportunities or options to the Congress, then it would take approximately 3 years for the funding to occur. Where this development would take place, if any, we don't know at this time.
For most visitors, whether campers, climbers, or casual passers through, Denali National Park and Preserve stands as a monument to wilderness.
Around me were bare rock, ice, and snow, not a sign of life. The silence broken now and then by the roar of an avalanche loosened by the midday sun, tumbling like a waterfall over some cliff to find a resting place thousands of feet below. I gazed along the precipitous slopes of the mountain and tried to realize again its great altitude, with a thrill of satisfaction at being the first man to approach the summit, which was only 9 miles from where I smoked my pipe. No white man had ever before reached its base,